Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Career Coach. In the last few videos, we have talked about casing 101, and I walked you through what a typical consulting case looks like, what are the different types of questions asked, and why do even interviewers test those questions, right? And then we also talked in a separate video about typical casing styles on how to run a case. Today, we're going to talk about take a particular example, and I'm going to take one question, which is brainstorming questions. You usually get two of them in an interview, and I would walk you through my approach of how I would solve a typical brainstorming questions, what are the expectations, and we will also talk about the typical solution. So I hope this is helpful. But before I go further, please don't forget to like and subscribe this channel if you find this content helpful. So before we start, here's a bit of disclaimer that these cases are purely generation of mine with the use of Gen AI tools. So I hold the full IP regarding these cases. So let's get into the video, right? A typical case would start with a prompt where interviewer would share with you the context, the problem statement, and more about the company. In this case, it seems like we are working with this brew better coffee company who makes ready to drink premium coffee, right? Despite strong year-on-year growth in sales volume, seems like profit margins have stagnated. CEO believes that increasing margins is crucial to remain competitive against low-cost brands and has asked your consulting team's help. Customers are price sensitive. Past attempts to raise prices have led to 15% drop in sales. The CEO wants a clear action plan to improve profit margins within next 12 months, right? So as you see, this is a long prompt and this is how it will come to you, right? The interviewer will read this long prompt to you. That would be the very first step of opening a case. Okay, so then what do you do? The step one as an interviewee is you to summarize it, right? What, and I would try to keep it to very short summary of all that you have heard. Of course you should take notes of all the data that has been given to you, because the expectation is that you're not asking them to repeat things which you should have captured at the first moment. Don't get me wrong, ask clarifying questions if you have not captured anything. They want you to be successful. But let's just first summarize, and the way I would summarize this case is, okay, I'm working with this company brew better coffee. They make ready to premium drinks. It seems like for the last few years their profit margins have been declining, and we are here to see what actionable recommendations you can give them to improve the profit margins. Done. Super sweet, super simple. So now that we have summarized the prompt and both interviewer and you align on that, okay, this is the problem statement, then this is your chance to clarify anything that you might have missed in the prompt. It could be that you have missed some numbers. For example, the prompt said the sales will decline by 15%, 15%, if they try to increase the revenue. Maybe you didn't capture that, or it's not about capturing the information that was already shared. You just have a question which you think has not been like clarified yet. For example, maybe you have a question, hey, does brew better only makes ready to drink stuff, or they also have other products, complementary products, such as some merchandise for bottles or t-shirts to like that they sell along with their brand. Or your question could be, hey, like this makes sense. I what is this company global, or are we thinking of only the US context? Anything, right, that comes to your mind and you think it would be helpful for you to know, because that would help you generate new ideas in the case, or that is just important consideration as you walk through your solutions. So remember, that's why the second step is clarifying questions, where you get a chance, and usually typically transfer 2 to 3 minutes. I please don't come up with 10 questions, or like 10 questions to ask, because you are the one who interviewing, not the interviewer, right? And they wouldn't have more information than you. This is just for you to show your curiosity and showing that, okay, before jumping into solutions you are thinking of the broader context. Okay, so now that everyone understands in the interview, the context, interviewer has shared it with you, you have asked your clarifying questions. Now is the time to get into solutions. And this is usually 5 to 6 minutes in the case. right? 5 to 7 minutes. So your first question, that this can be shared by the interviewer, where they say, okay, as a consultant, what key areas would you analyze to help brew better coffee co to improve margins, right? And this is something which they can share with you as your first brainstorming question, right? Or you might have to run the interview after asking the clarifying question. Okay, this makes sense. I am thinking that would first like to look into all the areas that they could look into to improve profit margins. Does that sound like a good next step, right? Watch more on this my video on consulting styles, that will give you an understanding of how to run a case in interviewer led versus an interviewee driven case. And now comes the most important step, the actual solution to a brainstorming question, right? So, the typical way to think about how to approach a brainstorming question is, think about, you need to lay down a clear structure, right? In general, no matter what kind of brainstorming open idea questions you have, right? Try to go for a messy structure. And the way I like to approach it is, no matter what kind of question you solve, and if that is specifically the first question, brainstorming question, you will always have first bucket, which is the context of that company. Before you think about, okay, what is the solution, what is the he in this case, how are you going to improve the profit margin, you first just need to understand what are the different kind of product SKUs they have, who is the target audience, how are they selling things like that. So you naturally want to know more about company and the product. And I personally believe that's the bucket which mostly works all the time, and is also most important, right? Unless you know what your client does and how do they do it, unless you deep dive on that, there is no way you can recommend any tactical or actionable solutions to them. Okay, second thing, right? So that's the first bucket. Typically any brainstorming question can have 3 to 4 buckets. Within each bucket you want to have at least 2 to 3 ideas. Less than 2 is a complete no, and more than 4 is maybe an overkill, unless you're feeling super confident about them, and that then you should definitely share those. That shows like you're thinking broader, right? Now that we have talked about the first bucket company, I usually also would like to know what's happening in the market. Sometimes it's just the macroeconomic factors. It's not just this company which might be facing the profit margins issues. It might be that everyone's in the industry is facing those issues, and these could be because of the bigger factors and not because of the operations within this company, right? So to understand where you're gonna pinpoint solutions, right, you would also want to know more about the market. So that could be a second bucket. And the third bucket is, now you can think about the operations itself, right? What kind of what's the pricing they have. Think of typical, if you want to right, talk about the profit is revenue minus cost, right? So I we have already talked about kind of revenue in the company bucket. That's where you would like to understand, okay, what are the typical products, what kind of revenue they make, but you still haven't thought about what is the cost to make these products, to finally understand where which cost items might be too high or too low, and where you can actually try to recommend some profit improvement solutions, right, or recommendations. So third book, it could be about the it's basically cost items itself, correct? So like this, basically the approach is exactly what I'm talking out loud with you. After you get the question, you take 1 minute pause, but this, like, I'm explaining this to you in detail. That's why this might sound like you have a long time, but actually you only have just 1 minute to gather your thoughts. And the best way to do it is, think of what are the key areas which you need to look into, and try to come up with 2 or 3 things in that area that you would like to expand upon. Okay, so if we talk about the actual solution, this is how you would communicate and the solution would look like. And as you see on the screen, right, the solution is exactly the way I explained in form of different buckets, different areas, and the way to communicate this. Hey, thanks for sharing the context. And I think as a starting point, before we move into recommendations, I want to analyze few areas. There are four things. First area, I want to look into the company, the brew better itself, right? I want to understand the target audience, the product positioning, and the current price points versus competitors. Second, I also want to look into the market just to understand more. What are the cost trends of these company, like basically at peers, right? For their products. What are the types of beans they are using? Are we sourcing something different? What is the demand for sustainably sourced coffee? Because that's what you mentioned our client is into, right? And then third bucket is about cost for these things, because typical profit margin would only we can only analyze the profit margin by understanding revenue minus cost. So I want to understand for brew better, what are the type of coffee beans they purchase, what's their logistic cost, what are the raw materials that they are sourcing, and how are they getting it from, like, what is the supply chain cost. There's buckets like that. And lastly, I also have some other ideas, considerations which I think are important, like what has been the change in weather, has that reduced the supply of the coffee itself? So now that you have shared the solution, the question doesn't end there. As you have realized, all of these are lot of areas that you have suggested to the client, that you want to the interviewer, that you need to look into, right, to come up with a tactical action plan of how to improve profit margins. So a good consultant knows where to look into first, because these are so many directions. And that's where the step 4 comes. You as an interviewee also need to suggest what are the next steps after on these areas, which areas you would like to prioritize. For example, I can say, as a next step, let's first look into the type of products better makes and sells, and what are the typical costs, right? So I hope this makes sense. This is how, guys, a typical consulting brainstorming question is approached and it goes. This is a long video because I wanted to explain to you in depth, but overall, in a real interview, expect all of these steps, from sharing the context with you to you delivering the answer of between 10 to 11 minutes. The full casing structure and the timing of a typical question video is already there on my channel, so feel free to watch that for more such more of that knowledge. And if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you.